Welcome back, everybody. Sorry for the delay. I am really excited to welcome Mike Griffiths, author of Listening to the Enemy, and his beautiful wife, of course. They have travelled some way to be with us today, and I feel a little bit giddy, so I'm going to say thank you, Mike. And yeah, I'm going to pass over to you, and we'll be inspired by your research. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you very much. Well, hello everybody. Yeah, it's been quite a journey here. Where would we be if we didn't have AI, eh? But of course, when it doesn't work, there's a problem there, and it sent us on roads we didn't want to be on. But there you go, we are here. Right, this story really, I'm going to fast forward that. You've heard of that, and you know the bloke who's about to speak, so we won't stay there. What really I want to do is to come on to that. Now, my father, as a family, we knew my father was involved in radio during the Second World War. You saw at the start there at St Erth, if anybody knows where St Erth is, it's a long way from here, but if you ever took a train to St Ives, you would have got out at St Erth Station in West Cornwall. Well, the village is nowhere near there, and the radio station is nowhere near St Erth, but they had to get, so they had to get a postal code kind of thing, so that's why it's called St Erth Radio Station. All we knew about what our father did during the war was, as somebody said, he listened to Jerry at the radio station at St Erth. We also knew he had a little black book, and this little black book was full of radio nets of the German and Italian war machine. And that's all really we knew, but he was an avid ham radio chap. So I grew up with CQ. I got to ask the question, are there any radio hams here?
No, but I know what CQ means.
Oh, right, okay. Can you read Morse?
Yes.
Right, okay, you're about to become famous. But I'll await.
Morse is rusty.
Yeah, but that's all right. I'm in the front, I decide, okay? It's all right, it's quite easy actually. Well, all we knew is he had this little black book, and he kept it in the back of his radio sort of cupboard full of all bits and pieces of valves and what have you, and he very rarely made mention of it, except he listened to the Germans in the Iberian Peninsula and also a spy in North America. That, you know, that story is quite amazing, which I'll come across to. But his book, as far as I was concerned, didn't have a lot in it. But I was able to start to unpick it by using some of the veterans of the Radio Security Service, which is the organisation my father worked for. Anyway, enough about that. There's my father. Now, he wanted to tell us what he did during the war. And in the spring of 1984, he sent me an audio tape. And the main thrust of the audio tape was something we didn't listen to for several years later, because the start of the tape was his upbringing in Liverpool, and we thought our dad's running through what we already know. We didn't listen to the last bit. He subsequently, I say subsequently, unfortunately died that summer of that year, and we never listened to the end of that tape for several years. But the most important bit of the tape is this bit. He said this to us. By then he had been dead several years. He wanted to tell us what he did during the war, his role in the Bletchley story. Of course, we didn't ask the question. So the last 10 years, plus lockdown, which was fortuitous because I wrote the book during lockdown, we've been able to unpick what he did. Right, before the war. My father worked for the GPO. A good number of you here and perhaps listening will know what the GPO was. That was the General Post Office, which was part of what is now British Telecom and the Royal Mail. And he learnt, we think he learnt Morse as a Boy Scout in Liverpool. And he was quite good at it. He could read Morse quite comfortably at 30 plus words a minute. His inhibiting factor was how fast he could write it down. Not only could he listen to the Morse and write it down, I've seen him do this, he'd write it down and listening to that ear, he would say, could I have a cup of tea, because I'm really parched. And he would still be writing it down. I mean, that's quite a skill. So, this was his early call sign, G2DFH. I remember that as George 2 Dog Fox How, and that's in my head. I also remember CQ, and as the gentleman was just saying, he knows what it means. But other than that, I didn't have any interest in it, neither did my two older brothers. So much to the disappointment of our father, we weren't really interested. Right, okay. Before the start of war, there was this chap called Lord Sandhurst. Some of you may know who he was. He worked for the government. He was also an avid radio ham, and he was asked to round up all the people in the country who were very good at radio, all things radio, because I think we need to emphasize that Morse and shortwave radio and all that aspect was cutting edge technology in its day, much like AI and our phones are now. And he would have received a letter from Lord Sandhurst at some point, would you give of your service to king and country? And he said yes. So war begins. Now, here comes the little black book. Inside the front cover of the little black book, he'd written the two postings he was offered. Thurso, which I've been up in Caithness, a wish place, rather cold and wet. He chose St Erth in West Cornwall, reasoning the rain would be warmer. That's pretty much why I'm here, because of the weather. Right, okay, moving on. Here he is, Dad, with his beloved Trilby hat. What was quite interesting about when he started working at St Erth was he was paid into his bank account in Penzance, and he was paid gross, which he must have thought was a bit odd. He and his colleagues at St Erth Radio Station. Apparently all the employees of MI6 during the Second World War did not pay tax. He was paid somewhere in the order of £7 a week. The average income during the Second World War was about £3 or £4. He was paid very, very well. He was also a civvy until November 1943. And then MI6 started to get a little bit worried about the fact, what was an able-bodied person walking around in the village? Where was his effort for the war? So he was enlisted into the Royal Signals as a corporal. So there he is with his, as I say, I've got it, the 30th of November, and as a member of the Royal Signals. He didn't do much as an enlisted man. He hated drill of all types, and rifle drills was a nightmare to him. He wasn't much of he was very much of a pacifist. Oh, does anybody know who this chap is? So you don't listen to the news then?
Oh, it's that chap who escaped, right?
Yeah. What regiment is he a part of?
Signals.
He's part of the Royal Signals. Yeah. There he is. So coming right up to date, some of my books are for sale down at Blandford Forum in the Royal Signals Museum. So I phoned up Adam Forte the other day and I said, Adam, what about this chap, Adam then? Daniel, rather. That's a bit of an embarrassment. He said, oh, I've been chased high and low by the media wanting to make a comment. He said, all I can say is, a very bright lad, but he hadn't gone very far into the system. Yeah. So he didn't know much. But, you know, the regiment still stands and it's still got a huge import. Right, father married a local girl. And like many of the people at the station did, this is his marriage certificate. I'll just bring your attention to what it says there. He was a civil servant. Okay? Nothing to do with what he actually did. He was a civil servant, and that was all as far as the authorities locally knew anything about him. Right. Moving on. Right, St Erth Radio Station. About 100 worked there throughout the war. What's interesting about this photograph, oh, my father's there at the top there. No, he didn't walk around with a big yellow arrow in his head, but I thought I'd just bring, he's got the similar style hair as me. Going back to that picture, 100 people. Why were 100 people still at the radio station in 1946? The war had ended a year ago. Well, correct, the Russians. We had the Cold War was in its infancy, but it was very much on the make. So there was a need for it. And I've got an account from a veteran who's now passed on, but he was very much trained up post-war to listen to the Russians. Okay, is my father. Right, this is the main reason for the station at St Erth. Now, the top secret ultra, we know that well, but during the war, it wasn't oft times referred to as ultra. I think Churchill referred to it as Boniface. And the other reference to it would have been MSS, most secret source. So wherever you come across that in any book to do with Bletchley and you come across with MSS, you're talking about Ultra and you're talking about the Radio Security Service. Right, the function of the Radio Security Service, I'll blow this up. This comes from the archives in London. Blow that one up, that's what it says. So that they were quite bright cookies. As I say, this ability to listen to Morse and have a conversation as well. But they were very good at it. I must do a plug. Nigel West's book is still, although it came out in the mid-1980s, Nigel West's book is still reckoned to be one of the best ones out that stitches the Radio Security Station Y stations and the Naval and the Army and the Air Force Y stations and where they fitted into the whole Bletchley story. Right, the main radio station site, this is circa 1946. If a German flew over that area, they wouldn't see much. Certainly wouldn't have big signs saying what was what there. Okay, the only thing that's still standing, if I just get that out, and that won't come out on the screen, so it doesn't matter. If you see the garden generator hut, that's the only thing that's still standing to give any indication of what was there. The farmer now uses it to keep grain and food stuff in it. And this is the DF hut. We're all familiar with DF, the term DF meaning directional finding. My father spent many an hour on his own in the middle of the night because of his locality, St Erth being the far west. It was used extensively during the Battle of the Atlantic, which was a departure from its main job, which was to listen to the German and the Italian war Secret Service. But being where it was, they had very easy contact out into the Atlantic, and they would pick up the German submarines' very, very short signals. And one of the characteristics of the German radio operator in his U-boat was he would put his mast up and he would throw up a very high voltage up the mast, and it would boil off the water on the mast, and it made a curious sizzling sound. The radio operators at St Erth and likewise knew exactly that was the forerunner to a very, very quick radio signal. So they would get the DF on it through a gadget called a genometer. I'm probably going to pronounce it wrongly, but it was a device that they used to find the location of this signal. They could do it in a matter of seconds, and it was sent back up here somewhere, and they would get a very quick DF on that submarine. They would notify Coastal Command. St Eville was one of the prime Cornish airfields where the Catalinas or the Sunderlands took off out into the Atlantic. They would go to the area where that signal came from. No submarine, because they only stayed up on the surface for a very short while, 20, 30 seconds, sank. They would sink, and then they would move around and come up in another area. Well, they knew that was the characteristics of the U-boat captain, so they just circled until it came up. And then by the time of spring, summer 1943, they were quite good at picking out these submarines, and they devastated the U-boat pack. But all because of this characteristic, they could pick up that sizzling sound on the radio. Quite amazing, amazing. Right, okay, this completely baffles me, but you've got to go with it. Right, we look at that scene there. I'm going to put a headphone up, if it'll come up. No, wrong way. Right, headphones, okay? Right, if you can imagine you're sitting in that chair, to the left of you is one receiver, to the right of you is another receiver, and in the center there's a gadget. It looks like a microphone, and that's what it is. Now, the operator would talk in that microphone to a chap called the comptroller. I don't think he was a big fat comptroller from the chap on the train. But what would happen is, if when they used got a message coming in from a German radio operator, they have somewhere, they would pick him up on the left receiver. That would come in the left earphone. Then what they would do is they would then start moving the band on the right receiver until they got the response. So what would happen is the German radio operator, or Italian, doesn't matter who, would do a preamble send them, which would be in straight Q codes, all right, Morse. They would do then they would do the message, which would be in the Enigma, and they would do a postamble. And all these characteristics were jotted down. Remember pre and postamble. I'll come back to them in a moment. All right. And what then would happen is my father would be writing like mad, and all his colleagues like mad. The comptroller, because he would be talking to the comptroller, saying, "Well, I've got him so and so, so and so, and he's now replying so and so, so and so," and they would then direct him where to look next. So it was very complex, but very high tech. How they did it, goodness knows. Just coming back to that, so that information went on, you've got to imagine, that went on for quite a long time, 12-hour shift. I'll play a little bit of Morse in a moment. There was also an underground tank. I won't tarry here much, but you'll have to believe me because I've been there. Okay, it's near Helston. It was an underground tank. Again, the aerial photograph taken in 1946, and the tank was in the middle of that field where it says site of the tank. No evidence of that whatsoever now, but the guard hut and what have you was used extensively by local farmers for donkey's years, so I'm very confident that was the field. Why underground? Well, a number of factors. First of all, it would meant any marauding plane coming over from Germany wouldn't spot this device in the middle of the field. And also apparently it cut down interference. Again, coming back to the world of radio. Right. This is where you're now going to, this is your hour. Right, okay, I'm going to play a very short piece of Morse. I originally was told by a veteran, Bob King, it was a training bit of Morse. What he didn't say, it was actually a German produced through the Enigma machine bit of Morse. So what you're looking for is 5 digits, all right, in sequence. It's all right, don't worry, because I'll run it back in a minute and you'll see whether you're right or wrong. So I like this bit. Okay, so listen to the first bit of Morse you hear, stay with it. Right, you got the gist. Yeah. 12-hour shift. You going to hazard a guess?
Well, I got bits. I got TCQ, TC.
Well, wait there.
And then I got dash, well, I'm not looking. Then I got dash 462 505 KJ RORS.
Well, come on. I'm going to clap that. That's absolutely brilliant. It really is, because to me it doesn't mean anything. And I'm supposed to be giving the address. Yeah?
Well, I think it was 5.
Anybody added it? You nodded earlier on that you knew a bit about Morse, didn't you? Oh, right, okay. Sorry.
I mean, I sat the post office Morse exam for my radio amateur's licence and instantly forgot everything I'd ever heard. One of the difficulties of listening to Morse like this is that for the post office exam, you only had to know the letters and the numbers separately.
Right.
And when you get mixed Morse like that, then to me, that's very difficult to copy, because I've known when you get a V, di-di-di-da, which we all know, is that the same as a 4, which is 4 dots and a dash. So I find it very difficult to listen to.
Right.
I will say the person who taught me Morse was an ex-ship's radio operator.
Right.
And he sat us all in a room and gave us a key and a buzzer and headphones. And he had another set of headphones that he was supposed to use to listen to our keys, because we all had 2 jack sockets on, so he would listen. But he didn't. He could tell what everybody in the room was sending just by listening to the key clicks.
Right.
He spent his life as a ship's radio operator up and down the coast of South America, and he could send with his foot quicker than I can with my hand.
Yes, that seemed to be a common story. Thank you very much. That's most informative. I'm sure, having got that film, people will be thinking, I'll have a go at this. But what's intriguing, and I need to make mention of that, is, of course, the fist of an operator is as identifiable as a fingerprint or a voice. So when my father and his colleagues, or in fact anybody working in the Y services, listened to an operator, they would know instantly, what's he doing over there? Because he may have changed regiment or a different part of Europe altogether. But Bletchley logged all that, and particularly a chap who worked with Alan Turing, and his name was Gordon Welshman. He liked it because he built up a whole science of what was known as traffic analysis, but I'll come on to that. Yeah, this was given to me, this interpretation, only just before Christmas. I gave a talk in Plymouth. I said, is there anybody who knows Morse well? And this chap said, I'll do it for you. And that's what he came back with. Thank you very much. You confirmed it. I'll send him an email when I get back.
You probably know that the QSR means please acknowledge receipt of message.
I can't, on a good day I do.
Yeah.
You see, it's not my world. Well, it is when I do this, but thank you for that as well. All right, now, my father would have written down whatever he picked up. Sometimes the messages were sent by phone up to just Arkley View, just down the road. Sometimes they were telegrammed up, and sometimes they went by snail mail, and he wrote them down on the log sheet. All right, so this was a log sheet produced by Bob King, and I'll just blow that up. And with Bob, incidentally, was a VI, which was a voluntary interceptor, which is something entirely different. He was a civvy, 16-year-old listening to Morse. Whatever he was told to listen to, it was, if you like, marked, and they came back and wrote in red, we don't need to listen to that anymore, or we need more of that. When we're looking at it nowadays, it's kind of Heath Robinson, very hit and miss, but it worked. That's all you can say. That's it blown up again in its 5-digit format. And they came very adept at it. Right, now let's come on to one of the nets in my father's code book. This idea of jotting down in that sort of very easy to read format, they think was an idea given by Lord Darcy, who was Hugh Trevor Roper, because he was part of the Radio Security Service. And they think he devised that way. You see, I'm familiar with it because I worked in the nuclear industry in Devonport Dockyard. And when we did nuclear procedures and nuclear logic, everything was in little bubbles. So that meant that, that meant that, that meant that. So that does make sense. What's the intriguing thing about this? First of all, you see the wide scope of St Erth and its colleagues were listening to up and down the country. Okay, Poland, Bordeaux, Paris, Norway, Holland, Switzerland. They were right across Europe listening to the German radio operators. And the other thing, which was told to me about by David Abruzzo, who some of you may know, is where you see A, B, or C next to that little box of the signals there, and that meant there was more than one operator at that particular spot, which again was a very, very fine-tooth combing of the messages that were coming through, like we heard just now. That was the walls of up the road here during the war, and I find this fact quite amazing. Rather than me regurgitating it, you just read it. That's quite astounding. We knew so much about the German war machine. Absolutely mind-boggling. I'm not going to stay with that, except that's an Enigma machine. You'll see them up there, and there's better descriptions up there. I'll go on to that. This is interesting. This is General Heinz Gürlemann, who's reckoned to be one of the greatest tank commanders of the Second World War, and his textbook is still used by NATO by all accounts. But you can see what's going on there. You can see the lower part of the picture. You can see an Enigma machine. To the right of the operator of the Enigma machine, there's a chap with the headphones. He's obviously the radio operator sending the signals off. So you needed 3 people really to operate an Enigma machine. So they weren't easy things to operate in the field of action. Right, I always strike this as quite funny. Right, I was born in West Cornwall, so you can just pick up my accent, I suspect. And I knew a lot of the people around that area. And this particular lady, Mary Curnow, I remember talking to me not so very long, but she died about 5 years ago, and I said I was coming up here to give a talk to the Radio Security Service reunion. She said, yeah. I said, what do you remember about it, Mrs. Curnow? She said, we all knew they were listening to Jerry. Now, we're talking about the secret of Bletchley. No one knew about Bletchley, yet all the villages of St Erth knew everything about the radio station up the road. Listening to Jerry. And she also went into the DF hut and had a chat with one of the operators. That was incredible. Right, I'm going to do this very quickly. It's just that no secrets in a Cornish village. Okay, the villagers set their clocks by the shift changeover times, the coming and goings of the military bus. St Erth is a small village, so they had to go to Penzance, St Ive, Camborne, where they were all billeted. So when the shift changeover bus came through, they all looked at their watch and thought, it must be shift changeover bus. Okay, most knew they were listening to Jerry. A good number of the station staff were married to local girls. My father is a case in point. Some villagers actually sat in the DF hut and the tank. I must tell you about the tank, the underground one. I was talking to a farmer's son who said, my father was a great radio man. He was a farmer that liked to listen to all the radio messages that were coming through. But during the war, you weren't allowed to have a transmitter, but you could keep a radio. Well, spares were hard to come by, but he grew a lot of cabbages, a lot of turnips, a lot of potatoes, so there was a black market going on. They would go to the tank, literally knock on the lid and say, I can't get this one going, boy. Can you help me? I got a lovely lot of potatoes here, look, you can have them. And so during the shift, the receiver was mended, up came the next morning, up came the mended receiver, down went the sacks of potatoes and broccoli. You see? So that went on a lot, right. Farmers were allowed to graze their sheep around the masts, so they knew the configuration totally. Football and cricket was played with the station staff. Home guard, of which my grandfather was one, did it with regulars at the guard at the site. And I've just spoken that one about the technological expert, not to mention spares. Right, so the village knew quite extensively what was going on up there. Right, there were three main areas. I mean, this is common sense, really. The Y stations, Army, Navy and Air Force. And of course, again, the radio competent civilians known as VIs. These were civvies who knew Morse but were either infirmed, too old or too young to join the services. So they were at home in their front room, listening to what they were told, listening to a particular area of the German war machine. And Bob King told us when he gave his talk some years ago in the mansion there, that he asked his sister years later, did you know what I was doing in the front room of Mum and Dad's house when I came home from school? She said, no, I didn't have a clue. He said she never asked him what he did. No one did. I mean, secrecy was a byword during the Second World War. Secrecy is something we don't know much about, do we? Right, okay, let's move on. I've already said that. Their main task was to listen to the Abwehr, the German secret intelligence service. There were 6 stations associated with the Radio Security Service dotted around the country. Bletchley, which you know about, this is what Churchill spoke about, the geese that laid the golden eggs and never cackled. I went to before lockdown reunion in 2017. You'll notice a lot of the people there were ladies. There were 10,000 people associated with Bletchley. The vast majority of them were women who were linguists, were certainly very good at, I needn't say that, I can get away with it here, but I won't, that women are very good at multitasking. And they were very good in interpreting some of the signals that came through. They would do it by cribs. And I've got an extensive bibliography there, which you're welcome to take. And I've gone down through all the books. If you really got nothing to do for the next 3 years, that will keep you busy. And one of them is about Hinsley, I think he was called. He wrote several books. And he talks about cribs. If it wasn't for cribs, some of the breakthroughs wouldn't have happened. Okay, interesting here, Bob Painter, I think he's now gone on. He worked for the Radio Security Service, and I was in conversation with him in 2014 when I came up here, and I said, Bob, what did you do? He said, well, I was a radio technician, and I'm going to do this very quickly. I used to do bits and pieces for Alan Turing. Alan Turing would come into my workshop and say, can you make this little basic little gadget for me? You know, very simplistic electrical gadget with basic valves and things like that, which he said I did. He would then come take it from me and go scuttling off. Well, of course, he was in the middle of putting together what we now know as the bomb, you know, which he got from Marian Rajkowski, the Polish cryptologist. He got the bomb with an E, and anyway, we'll move on to that in a moment. I've got a picture of the Bismarck there. The reason why I got a picture of the Bismarck was that all German capital ships carried a member of the SS or the Gestapo, just to make sure, I think, that the ship would follow out all the commands from Berlin. But of course, what they did was then send a radio message back to Berlin, and as part of the Abwehr, but the Abwehr Morse had been broken very early in the war by Bletchley Park, because places like the stations like St Erth had picked up the messages very early on in the war. So they always, Bletchley knew where all the German capital ships were. So when you read about the demise of the Bismarck or the Tirpitz, you've got to bear in your mind that Bletchley knew only because of the Y stations, because their Gestapo element kept on writing home, if you like, you know, which was bad news. Yes, so that's that. Alan Turing, you know well. Much of the thrust of Bletchley here is to do with Alan Turing. And this is known as a Prof's book. I think they've got a picture of it up there, but this only came out in 2005. Then it was redacted, so much of what he picked up on is still subject to the Official Secrets Act. You may have seen this film. Yeah. Max Hastings has reputedly said that it is a silly little film, and primarily it's because in the film, Alan Turing was arrested for allegedly being a Russian spy. Totally wrong. He was arrested because of his homosexual activities. Why the film had to, I don't know. Anyway, we know this bloke. Brilliant. I mean, he took Turing's idea, added the diagonal board, and it became the Turing Welshman bomb, which was a brilliant bit of kit, and the Americans made quite a few of them. Now, the luck of, incidentally, this chap, we know who this chap is, because of traffic analysis, where Gordon Welshman tied in with all these incidental messages in before the Enigma message it out, he jotted it down, he put together a pattern, he dubbed it traffic analysis, and it's still subject to the Official Secrets Act, much of it. But that's how they got Osama bin Laden. The FBI, CIA pinned him down using the same technique that Turing dreamt up. Well, not dreamt up, but thought through. We're all subject to that. Being a Cornishman, I'm bound to have Cornish cream there. All right? But if you go shopping anywhere and use your card, particularly the big supermarkets, you'll know exactly what happens. Oh, these pop-ups come up on your phone, or you'll get a readout at the till, because the computer of the company is reading your traffic. And so we're all subject to what is now the way of life we live. Right. Very unusual occurrences in life happen. You go on holiday and you see someone you haven't seen for about 50 years and they're out in the same hotel as you. Well, this lady, Susanna Griffiths, is the daughter of Gordon Welshman. She lives in East Devon. I got to know her and I had quite an interesting yap with her. I should say talk with her. Quite an adept lady. Right, so that's her father, Gordon. She said it was quite a ladies' man and a brilliant mathematician, very much on the spectrum. So when this chap comes into the picture, you've got two very eminent mathematicians, both on the spectrum. So she said to begin with, they never got on at all. Well, it's not too hard to think, you know, if you're very obsessed with yourself in a particular area, you come across somebody else, you think, hang on a minute, no, that's my idea, well, whatever. Well, they didn't get on to begin with, but they did gradually, because the result of that was their bomber, the Turing Welshman bomb. Yeah, so that was quite interesting. Recently, I was interviewed by West Devon, very small radio organisation. They interviewed me about my father's war effort, and also Susanna and her father's war effort. And she's holding her father's book, The Hut 6 Story. And next to them is Peter Marsh. He's a Financial Times journalist, and he's got the biography of Gordon Welshman, which is again something I've not read, and I think I ought to. Right, Tommy Flowers, I'm going to say basic GPO engineer, but Tommy Flowers put all that together. That's the amazing thing. Yet Tommy Flowers, I don't think has got much of a gong, if anything, to say this is what he did for the war effort. Quite an amazing man. And the Americans claimed that they were the first to put together a programmable electronic computer, and he was not able to refute that because he was subject to the British Official Secrets Act. You're nodding, so you're on the same page as me. It's always good to have someone in the audience nodding. Well, I'm not going to stay there because I've been around and taken photographs of that. Bill Tutt, another absolutely groundbreaking. His family now are very good at engaging schools in what their father did. Amazing, as you know, Jerry Roberts, Captain Jerry Roberts, has written it in his biography that he sat for months just twiddling around on bits of paper and paper, stacking them up. And he dreamt up a device called this, the Lorenz cipher machine, which Lorenz was used by the German High Command only for the senior officers. That was Hitler's little inner cabinet, if you like. And he dreamt that up. I think there is one up in the museum, isn't there? But another unsung hero of Bletchley Park. Right, we're pretty well tuned into it. St Erth's listeners, the Abwehr, the German Navy, the Italian Navy, the SD, the SS, the Japanese diplomatic service, and the Russians. So they had quite a wide brief. I need to stay here for a moment and talk about the Abwehr. Wilhelm Canaris, he wasn't a Nazi. He paid for his life. He was hung in Flossenburg in the spring of 1945 because they thought he was implicated in an attempt to kill Hitler. But his organisation were very lax when it came to using Morse. So it was very easy to crack their code. He had a mistress, allegedly Helena Stromansky, wife of Colonel Antonio Stromansky, the last pre-war Polish military attaché in Berlin. She was also the mistress of Canaris and a spy for MI6. She acted as a conduit for the anti-Nazi element of Germany. So I've read in many spots, but I dare say there's more to the story. Just coming back to that, the archivist, Stan Ames, says it's absolutely amazing they've got that information about what the station did. This is the Abwehr HQ in Hamburg, doing much the same thing. They were homing in on the British and the American radio operators. And let's come on to the 20 committee, the double cross system. Right, now the double cross, the deception plan that was run by the double cross system. Quite astounding. Right, that's a good book. He wrote it. He was tasked to write down what he did at the end of the war. He wanted to publish it, but he wasn't allowed to. So I believe he went to America and published it. Right, the double agents. Right, there's 120 of them, but there's only a few that really have got quite an interesting story. And the ones, as far as St Erth and sister stations are associated with, are the ones that use Morse. Okay, let's listen to this chap, Zigzag. He was a scoundrel and a half. You wouldn't want him as your next door neighbour. He was a safe cracker. He ran a gang known as the Jelly Gang. Right, okay, now, what happened was he was captured and put in a jail in Jersey or Guernsey, I think it was Jersey, just before the Germans invaded the island. They took everybody out of the prisons, took them back to France, and about 6 or 7 months later, they decided to interview all these miscreants and find out what made them tick, why are they in jail. When they came and talked to Agent Zigzag, Eddie, they said, why are you here? Well, I'll do anything to get back at the British. I hate them in any form. What can I do to help you? Well, bizarrely, they believed him. And they said, would you spy for us? He said, of course I will, anything to get back at them. So they taught him rudimentary Morse. He wasn't very good at it. They also taught him microphotography, and they also taught him about blowing things up, which of course, clearly he didn't need to know that. He was already very good at it. So he was piloted over and he parachuted into a Cambridge field and gave himself up to MI5 and said, look, I want to spy for Britain. They weren't too sure whether he was for them or against him. That's why they call him Zigzag. Is he for us or against us? For us or against him? So that's how his name stuck. Now, his training call sign was the Triple F. He became known as the 3F man. And my father at some point picked him up on one of his shifts. I've just enlarged that. So that was his training call sign, the 3Fs. When he went live, as it were, it became 5Fs. So marginally simple, but he wasn't very good at it. Now, here he is. He was asked by the Germans to tell them where the V1s were dropping on London. So obviously he was being then run by MI5. And they said, well, tell them they're going too far. They're going north of London. They're not hitting London, which he did. And subsequently, they all landed in around Kent, which was good news if you lived in London, but certainly not good news if you lived in Kent. And just to follow that story through, I gave a talk in Soldas many years ago, and a chap said, oh, that's why my grandmother, who lives up in Whitstable, has got an old doodly bug as a garden ornament. She literally had one that didn't explode, and it's sitting in her garden. Well, allegedly it didn't explode. So let's hear him. He sounds rather drunk, but he's talking about the amount of money he received from the Germans. Incidentally, the Germans paid all their double agents, but which they weren't allowed to keep because the authorities, MI5, MI6, took the money from them. But the money was all counterfeit anyway. Well, there's a surprise. Right, okay, here he is.
And they said, the moment you hear an explosion in London, you note the time down, and you find out where it's landed. And if possible, a description of the destruction. So I said, great, fine. And I was to be paid £100,000.
Oh, incidentally, do you want to hear that? That's a doodly bug.
And they said, the moment you hear an explosion in London, you note the time down, and you find out where it's landed. And if possible, a description of the destruction. So I said, great, fine. And I was to be paid £100,000.
Doodly bug. Right, brilliant book by Ben McIntyre. It really runs. He's a great writer in this area. It just runs and runs and runs. You can't, you know. I ought to get a sub for every time I've said this. Right, tricycle. Has anybody come across tricycle? No? Wow. Agent Tricycle. He was a jack of the lad. He only had an interest in wine, women and song. He was a Slavic playboy. He was approached by the Abwehr saying, would you spy for us? He hated all things to do with the German Nazi and anything. But he said, yes, of course I will. He said, well, we'll get you to Britain because in those days you could fly from Lisbon into Bristol. There was, you know, the Dakotas used to do that run. So there wasn't a problem to it. He got himself into Britain. He gave himself up and he said, right, the Germans want me to spy for them. I want to spy for you. Now, the Germans had said to him, when you get to Britain, we want you to get yourself to America because America wasn't in the war at that time, and to find out what the Japanese, or rather, sorry, what the Americans were doing in Hawaii in terms of their naval fleet. Is it well protected? Because Germany and Japan, you know, war with mixed strange bedfellows. That's what the Germans have asked, rather Japanese than that the Germans. So they got him into America. And he went and saw this bloke, who we all know, who took an instant dislike to him. By all accounts, Hoover sort of went the other way. He wasn't into wine, women and song. So he despised Popoff completely. And when he said, well, look, the Japanese are interested in all things Hawaii, and particularly around the naval base, which was Pearl Harbor, he ignored him. And then what happened then on December the 7th, 1941? Pearl Harbor. So you get the drift. Ignored it. But there were a lot of other reasons why the Americans ignored the obvious, okay? Now, tricycle. Bit of a Jack the Lad, he was. It is thought that Ian Fleming, who worked in naval intelligence and who would have been privy to much of what Popov was involved in, he believed well, it's got legs, I think. Why was he called tricycle? Because apparently he used to get very cold at night. So he had to go to bed with two others. Or he had two other agents. So you think what you like about that one. Anyway, I'm going to move on very quickly. This is a cracking story. I mean, American connection. I can't stay on it. At times it prevents me from staying on it. But my father always said he listened to a German spy in North America. And in his code book, he's got this. He's picked up this German spy, and he says, having picked the spy up, listened to him sending messages to Lubeck, this German spy then reverted to his amateur status and started sending messages under W2MXB, which was the American code sign, call sign. Well, I was talking to Stan Ames about that, who is also a ham radio operator. He said, I'll Google W2MXB, and he found it was still being used. So he thought, hang on a minute, what's that all about? Well, this is the story. Right, William Siebel was a German-American, and he threw his lot in with the Americans and became an American citizen. As I said there, in about 1938, he went back to Germany to see his aging mother, and he was approached by the Abwehr and said, we'd like you to spy for us, as you're an American, but German. He said, well, I don't know about that. He said, well, if you don't, it'll go ill for your family. So he said, okay, I will. I'll spy for you. So he got his way back to America, and he gave himself up before he went into a German embassy, and rather an American embassy, and said, look, the Germans want me to spy for them, but I want to spy for you. Can you get me back home and set me up and help me in whatever I've got to do? They said, yes, most certainly. So he got back to America. They set him up in a room in 42nd Street rather, and in it was a two-way mirror, and beyond that was a microphone and a camera, because what the Germans wanted William Siebel to be is to be the fulcrum, the principal man for all the German spies in America to report to. So he became the most important German spy in America. And then what William Siebel had to do was to send the information he's gleaned back to Berlin. Right, okay, so that was the setup. Now, he was taught basic Morse code by the Germans, but when he got over to America and he was then with the FBI provided him with a radio operator. And that radio operator, one of the radio operators, was somebody my father knew from before the war. So you can see the link there. My father knew that radio operator, a young man who worked for naval intelligence over there, US Navy, sending German messages over to Germany. So he obviously naturally thought he was a German spy, but he wasn't. He was under the FBI. Now, the FBI didn't tell the MI5 or MI6 any of this, but my father reported this up the chain and said, look, I picked up this. So MI6 said, that's interesting, went to the FBI and said, why are our operators picking up what appears to be a German spy ring emanated from New York? And they said, oh, no, got nothing to do with that. So they then came clean and said, well, actually, we're running a sting. And we've rounded up all these German-American spies, And we're thinking about putting them on a big trial. Well, MI6 said, don't do that. We'll get all we can from it. But this chap, that's the book incidentally, Peter Duffy, excellent book. I'd recommend that. I've got it in my biography there. Get hold of that. It's a really good, it runs well. Let me go back to, I want to go and get to this chap now. I got a picture, anyway, it doesn't matter, I can say it anyway. The FBI wanted to blow. Hoover wanted it to be known to everybody that the German spy network has been sewn up by the great American FBI. So much the disquiet of MI6, it was blown out of the water. And what was interesting is just as the war finished, Hollywood made a film. All right, the house on 92nd Street, they've altered the number of the street. But it's still on the internet, so if you Google that one, you can bring that one up. And you will listen to the story. It makes vague references to the full story. Right, okay, I'm going to move on from there. Yes, my father's book, nets here, show some major Allied operations in the theatre, particularly of the Mediterranean. Operation Pedestal, a brilliant book, just read that one, excellent. And in Operation Pedestal, this is you can see Dad's net there. He's got Morocco, he listened to the site of Morocco, and in Morocco, Ceuta was where the Abwehr had their station. So they were listening and viewing all the naval traffic coming across the Straits of Gibraltar. So St Erth would have been listening to that for sure. And Operation Mincemeat, you've probably seen that film. I mean, I'm old enough to remember, that's a brilliant book, incidentally, Ben McIntyre again. I'm old enough to remember seeing the film The Man Who Never Was. You know the one where the body was shot ashore off Spain, attaché case. In it was supposed secret documents that allegedly said the Allies are going to invade Greece. So the Germans put all their force in Greece, but in fact the Allies actually invaded Sicily. And it worked tremendously well. That's an old film. This is the most recent one. They've got more information, and I'm told it's pretty. Has anybody seen that one? Yeah. Is it quite good? It's very good. Yeah, well, you know. So in the background, if anybody sees, St Erth would have been listening to all that traffic because it fell very much in their backyard. All right, okay, the SD and the Gestapo, that's picked up in Dad's book. Here's the group number. They're all given group numbers. And so wherever it appears, 3 and 13 was to do with the Gestapo. And this is the odious man, Heinrich Himmler. What was particularly foolhardy about the SS and the SD is they effed and blind a lot, which meant decrypting their messages was pretty easy. And also they'd often say Heil Hitler at the start and at the end of their message. You know, again, which wasn't too difficult to stitch in when you had something to decrypt. The other thing, of course, is the young ladies at Bletchley up the road here would have had a crib board full of German swear words in order to bring it down. Oh, I wonder if he's saying that today. Right, okay, so they were quite easy to crack. So enemies from within. This chap, we know who this is? Philby. Yeah, here is the odious Kim Philby. What can be said? He never ever said what he did was wrong. I'm not going to stay on this, but I am though.
The last time I spoke to a communist, knowing that he was a communist, was sometime in 1934.
Liar. Right, okay. Now, Spy Monk's Frank, another Ben McIntyre story, very, very good. Now, the thing about Philby when it comes to St Erth is his involvement with MI6 was such, he had oversight of the Iberian Peninsula. So everything that St Erth was involved on in that part of Europe and sent up here, Philby up here would have got that information and sent it to his Russian controller. Everything, even St Erth, the existence of St Erth. It's still doing the rounds on BritBox now, apparently. Right, Blunt, another one. He worked for MI6. He gave the entire books of all the military people associated with MI6 to his Russian controller. So everything here was known by the Russians. Everything in all the Y stations was known through him by the Russians. John Cairncross, the fifth man, you will know, most of us have lived through this one with the involvement of Margaret Thatcher when that came out into the public domain. He worked for the GPO before the war, and it was the GPO that ran most of the radio stations across the country. So he was able to tell the position of all these radio stations to his Russian controller. So everything was known by them, which is quite scary. He did quite a lot damage. He was born in Plymouth, and so did Maclean. But those first three, blew the whistle very much. Chapman Pincher in his book, Traitor, has put it kind of like that. That's how much information was passed to the Russians. So much was passed to the Russians that the Russians believed that the Cambridge Five were actually double agents working for the British. You know, it's so bizarre. Oh, right. Oh, the crown jewels. Yes. Excellent. In there is A to Z about the Radio Security Service. You know, it doesn't get quite bad. I like this story. This is where the big three were dividing up Europe. Churchill, Roosevelt and Stalin. Well, of course, they're looking at each other with a knowing grin, all three of them. But the one who knew the most, of course, was Joe Stalin, because not only was it he there, he was there with this chap, he had that chap, he had that chap, he had that chap, and he had that chap. I mean, there was far more in that photograph than you can see. No wonder he was smiling. Right, Harry, nearly done now, folks. Harry Griffiths post-war. He reverted, or not reverted, he went back to his beloved radio ham work. And he meticulously kept his radio station log up to date. And he was quite good at it. It was just a smattering of Russian interest with him. Most of the people there would have been men that had learnt Morse during the Second World War. So he was quite busy. So that was 1946. If you fast forward to 1970, he was starting to get really pursued by Russian or Iron Curtain radio hams, wanting to know what he did, where he worked, all about his family. And the reason why was because he blew the whistle, and probably they knew our father, you know, so it doesn't take much to add all that up. Frequently, he had to hand over his logs to Naval Security. And they kept on saying, humour them, send back sort of ambiguous statements, but keep you know, like the fish. And so, and him, and yes, so it was quite an interesting time. Dad didn't make much of it. Right, post-war, Cornwall. St Erth Station closed, and then the one at Morwenstow at Bude opened up. It really is one of the main gateways to our information into our country now, without question. It's part of the Five Eyes, which you know about. And the founders were the five up there, obviously, and that's why if you hear something of a dubious nature in the world of intelligence, then oftentimes Australia will make a comment out of the blue, or Canada, and you think, well, what have they got to do with it? Well, that's the reason why. And you've got the 9 Eyes, another 4 countries, and there is also a 14 Eyes. Headquarters, this lady, Anna Keyston Butler, is the head of that, and they literally can read everything we do on our mobiles. That's a recent link that's gone into North Cornwall. This chap is the head of MI5, anything to do with on-land security. And this chap here, this lady knows all. She is his political master. You can get information from MI5. You can send them a letter. They're very, very polite. You can ask them a question and they will give you an answer. Whether it's the truth or not is quite another thing. Remember the work they're involved in, but they will answer. Don't bother with MI6. They'll neither deny or accept anything. Okay, Richard Moore is the head of MI6. This is his political boss. So if you hear James Cleverly saying, do not go to Venezuela, there's a fair chance he's not saying that because he doesn't want you to go there, is he knows something from MI6. And of course, our Prime Minister, and of course, Keir will know everything as the official leader of Her Majesty's opposition. Or, sorry, that's old, isn't it? His Majesty's opposition. Joe Biden will know, and unfortunately, so will he. He will know a lot. London is awash. Thank the Lord, literally, that we've got a national cyber centre, because they are very much the bastion of our world now, very much. And of course, you could not deny the truth of that. Right, okay. On there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions?
So can you wait for a microphone so our friends at home can hear? Thank you.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I'd like to acknowledge your bravery in crossing the Devon-Cornwall border to in the.
Well, yeah, my father's Liverpudlian, don't forget.
To gather your historic information. That was fantastic. I was just wondering, you mentioned the tank, the extent they went to hide the site, but obviously to be able to receive those radio signals, you would need masts. And I don't know whether you were aware of any special clever things they did to mask the masts they were using.
Well, I do know post-war, a local said to me they had red light on the top, so a local airplane wouldn't hit it.
They weren't really hidden.
Oh, they were during the war. No, they weren't because, as I said, I've got a picture. The only known picture of the top of the tank is in my book. They were the standard 4-mast arrangement that then came down through a central conduit down into the tank. The tank was about here to the wall in diameter. Well, no, perhaps about 30 feet. Is that 30 feet? Yeah, about that. And it wasn't the best place to spend 12-hour shift. But yeah, they didn't hide it like that.
Okay.
Anybody else with a question?
Yeah. I'm sort of surprised your father's book survived and whether or not the authorities knew he took it out with him.
Yeah, well, it's small enough. I should have brought it. It's only about that big. So it would have gone into his tunic. But it's true to say the book encapsulated what went on up the road. Very much so. You know, every page had a story. So it was as ultra secret as it went, but obviously it followed home and it would have stayed in his tunic hanging on the doorpost until he went back on his shift. But that's often been said to me, and the other thing has been said to me, are you not afraid of having a knock on the door one day and say, can we have a word with you? Yeah.
Well, it's good that these things have survived because so little has.
Yes. Yes, they think, Stan Ames, the archivist, thinks that much of the MI6 wartime information relating to the Radio Security Service has been torched.
Thank you.
Any more? Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you. Right.